Guilty Gear Strive tells us the heartwarming story of Bridget, an adorable transgender woman finally coming out with the support of her friends. But is it really that simple? Welcome back to OtakuDaiKun. Dai here. I've gone on record in previous videos stating that I have no issue with Japanese artists and authors willingly choosing to explore topics like LGBT issues or gender identity. I clarify that the problem lies with localizers forcing said themes into an artist's work when it wasn't originally there. That, and there's the possibility that an artist is only focusing on said themes due to societal and international pressure, though proving that is a lot trickier. Basically, I want anime artists to have freedom of expression, and for their works to remain preserved authentically in other languages. I have two different cases to talk about today, which have fans on social media wondering what's really going on. In one, we have a character whose gender is literally never addressed in any official capacity, yet a journalist insists they're non-binary. The other is a well-known and long-beloved femboy who has in fact officially come out as trans, making fans question the motive and sincerity of their creators. Going into this video, I want to clarify that I have no personal issues with transgender or non-binary characters in anime. I merely want to get to the truth of the matter, and in these cases it's hard to tell what's really going on. It's nuanced at the very least. Personally, I think the Western paradigm of sex and gender is just one way of many to explore personal identity, and I often find that LGBT activists will condemn and vilify perspectives that differ from their own. For example, there are some activists who insist that bisexual women aren't real members of the LGBT community if they wind up committed to a man. Any bi people in heterosexual relationships don't count because they're choosing the easy route and aren't facing the same level of discrimination as a vanilla homosexual. The problem with this logic is that even if people aren't all the same, that doesn't mean they can't be allies. A bisexual at Pride, for instance, is still supporting the cause, just as there are plenty of straight people who want love and identity to be free of stigma and discrimination. In terms of fiction, we can see this with Naoto Shirogane from Persona 4. She's a girl who struggles with gender conformity out of a need to be taken seriously as a detective. Initially, she fears that being seen as a woman makes her less of a professional, less like the detectives she looks up to. As such, her distorted shadow takes this to the extreme, embodying the will to undergo a sex change to solve all her problems. Throughout the game, however, Naoto learns that her gender nonconformity doesn't make her any less of a woman, or at least it doesn't have to. Her being a woman doesn't invalidate her career path or her skills, and her dressing as a man doesn't necessarily invalidate her being a woman. It seems some trans fans of Persona 4 take offense to this message, feeling Atlus did Naoto dirty by not making her straight up identify as a dude. They were so bothered by this that they created a patch that alters Naoto's character and story to effectively make her transgender, despite that not being the creator's vision or the point of her arc. This bugs me, because even though Naoto isn't actually trans, that doesn't mean she'd have an issue with trans people. At the very least, she'd certainly understand the struggle of coming to terms with one's gender identity, and she'd definitely support a trans person in their transition if that's what they ultimately decided on. She's every bit a trans ally, even without identifying as trans herself. The same goes for Astolfo in Fate. He's a femboy who looks, sounds, and dresses effeminately. He's more feminine than some actual women, yet he still identifies as a boy. Either way, he's an inspiring character that is able to accept himself and others without judging them for their identity or appearance. He may not be the trans rep you always wanted, but I can guarantee you he'll support your journey all the same, unless you're a depraved jerk like his original master. And that open and friendly attitude of his should be welcome in any trans circle. Believe it or not, neither of these two characters are the ones I want to discuss in today's video. I only bring them up to emphasize how we shouldn't be up in arms at each other over how a fictional character identifies. This applies to localizers who may feel inclined to bend the truth for the sake of diversity. Such was the case for the manga, I Think I Turned My Childhood Friend Into a Girl, with the localizer forcing a self-identifying femboy into being a trans girl in their English version. The issue wasn't that the character was actually trans or not. It was whether or not the author meant for him to be trans, and in this case, he wasn't. That's why whenever these gender issues come up, it's best to look at the original Japanese to try and discern what's really going on. If such care isn't taken, then it's possible that perfectly valid identities will be unnecessarily altered due to a difference of Western perspective. In those earlier examples, it was femboys and tomboys being labeled as trans due to their non-conforming behaviors, but that doesn't necessarily have to mean anything. Our first discussion was provoked over the character Juniper in Xenoblade Chronicles 3, when an article from The Gamer came out declaring Juniper as non-binary. Its author, Jade King, insults gamers as bigots who need to get over themselves because the gaming market has left them behind. The article is condescending and unprofessional, but it does raise the question of whether Juniper actually is non-binary. I have to admit that initially, I saw Juniper's design and viewed her as a cute, sexy archer girl whose bare midriff matches my sense of aesthetics perfectly. Despite this assumption, nobody's ever officially confirmed or denied she was a girl, and even in the game itself, the topic is never brought up. Jade King jumps the gun, taking this as a sign of Juniper lacking a gender, but their insistence is premature. Not knowing someone's gender does not make them non-binary. So, as I refer to Juniper, I'll use they/them as a placeholder, not in validation of them being non-binary. Regarding the truth of the matter, I wanted to experience the game for myself without spoilers first, before doing further research. But now that I've been able to do so, I can safely say that Juniper's gender is simply never mentioned. Jade remarks how, in the localization, Noah and his crew use the pronouns they/them to describe Juniper. But after looking at those exact moments in both English and Japanese, it's not enough to confirm or deny anything. For practically every interaction, the characters are either referring to Juniper by name, directly speaking to them, or using they/them in a grammatically vague sense. For instance, Taion here goes, "About that archer, they seemed quite the formidable opponent." In this case, the term archer isn't gender-specific, so it makes sense to follow up with they. That doesn't mean Taion is intentionally treating Juniper as non-binary. He just met him after all. When Noah refers to Juniper, he's actually referring to both Juniper and her allies when he says them. This vagueness is the same in Japanese. As a language, Japanese doesn't rely on pronouns much to begin with. A lot of Japanese derives meaning from context, so oftentimes you'll see the subject of a sentence omitted because it's implied. Something more like, "Oh, you mean that archer? Seemed quite formidable." On that front, I noticed some false evidence floating around online trying to show Juniper referred to as kanojo, which certainly would make her a girl. But this text isn't from an official source. Not once in-game for either language is Juniper referred to in third person as kanojo, otoko, or anything gendered we can latch onto. Same goes for any official statements made by Nintendo or Monolith Soft as of yet. I want to note, though, that if you blindly copy and paste the text into Google or DeepTL, you may find the translation using pronouns, but that doesn't necessarily count as evidence, since these applications are often forced to make a guess. The AI isn't perfect. Sadly, both Xenoblade 2 and 3 do have altered localizations, including a plethora of name changes and strange expressions that weren't needed. Pyra, for instance, is actually named Homura, but both versions kept the name themed around fire. Juniper's actual name is Yuzuriha, meaning both versions share the same theme of flowers. I would have loved to blame Juniper's androgyny on the localizers, but surprisingly, that is not the case here. I want to reiterate that just because nobody brings up or directly addresses Juniper's preferred gender or sex, that doesn't suddenly make them non-binary. There's a big difference between not knowing this gender and for Juniper to actually state they don't identify as male or female. That means the closest official statement we currently have comes from Juniper's English voice actor, Lily Hart, who identifies as non-binary and insists the character is the same. Except, this doesn't actually count as proof. Having a non-binary VA does not suddenly make their characters non-binary too. A gay guy can voice a straight character. A black guy can play a white woman if the voice fits. That's the beauty of voice acting. I'm not sure at this point that I'd even trust Nintendo directly addressing the issue. On a corporate level, they could totally choose to play into this drama and agree with Lily for diversity points. Nah, I probably won't believe it till it's said by Tatsuya Takahashi and his team at Monolith Soft. Until then, I don't think you'd be wrong using any pronouns you deem fit. I think Juniper looks, sounds, and acts enough like a girl for me to consider her one. At the same time, though, we do have traps for a reason. I've been mistaken before, because anime can make someone look and sound however they want, then surprise us with the exact opposite of what we'd expect. Ultimately, regarding Juniper, I want to clarify that, as of the recording of this video, we simply don't know the character's gender. I refuse to take that as some huge win for the LGBT against incel bigots, or whatever Jade King was asserting. As far as I'm concerned, minus the name, the script is mostly faithful to the Japanese, so if the Japanese team eventually declares Juniper one way or the other, I'll accept it. Until then, this debate over Juniper being non-binary happens to be a non-issue. The far juicier thing to discuss is likely what you've all been waiting for. Bridget, from the long-running Guilty Gear series, has recently been added to the latest game, Guilty Gear Strive, as a DLC character. Within Strive's arcade mode, Bridget struggles with being true to herself, ultimately feeling confident enough to announce that, despite being a biological man, she identifies as a woman. Again, I can assure you that this is the exact same, whether you're playing the game in English or Japanese, meaning that it's not a case of localizers interfering with the creator's vision. Whether the creator's vision should be celebrated, however, is a whole other story. Again, I once said that I'll stand by the original creator's vision, but while that seems to be the case here, there's a bit more to unpack. It'd be easy to accept this scenario if Bridget were a brand new character, but the problem is that she's been for the longest time a beloved femboy who insisted on his male identity. In that regard, he was an iconic femboy who showed no sign of doubting his gender until this latest release. What does this revelation mean for Bridget's existing fanbase? Do they have any valid reasoning to refute her as a trans woman? Let's look a bit deeper. At first, Bridget coming out as trans seems irrefutable, but just a day after her launch, fans had begun to question if this scene right here is even canon. As it turns out, Guilty Gear Strive's arcade mode gives you different interactions based on your performance as a player. If you lose any given match, you'll be treated to a different cutscene than if you had a flawless victory without being KO'd even once. Out of essentially 4 different endings, only one of them actually features Bridget coming out as a girl, and it happens to be when you complete Stage 8 after having lost a match in Stage 7. In other words, the ending that everyone's talking about could be described as one of the bad endings. In it, Bridget admits to both Kai and Gold Lewis that she's been worried about what other people will think of her. She's been telling everyone she's a boy, and has been for a while now. But now that she's got supportive friends, she feels confident enough to declare her new identity. In the other 3 endings, Bridget's identity struggle remains unresolved. Kai and Gold Lewis encourage her to be true to herself, and she simply thanks them for the courage. Some have interpreted this as Bridget declaring not to transition, and to keep identifying as male. The way I see it, these endings are just unresolved, without Bridget making a decision either which way. Was this a sign of Arc System Works refusing to commit, or perhaps was it a way for them to try and appease both classic fans and potential new ones? In that regard, it's almost like the game is letting players choose which path they want Bridget to go down, which is odd. I don't think there's anything malicious about her trans ending being a bad ending, but I really do wonder why such an important character moment isn't featured as a prize for her flawless victory run. As to what is canon or not, I really can't say, and I do hope the creators clarify this for those of us who want a better answer, even if that answer is they meant for players to decide. I mean, the original Bridget design had him sporting a male symbol on his hat, which has now been changed to a combination of the male and female signs. It's a symbol for androgyny, not femininity. This very well could be interpreted as having all the endings be valid. Of course, it could also just symbolize her internal struggle, rather than her actual answer to that struggle. So, perhaps you can save face and still call Bridget a guy, based on this strange narrative setup, but that hasn't stopped fans from arguing about the very idea of a trans Bridget. Some are in celebration, while others have some reasonable concerns based on the character's existing legacy. One popular consensus is that the very nature of Bridget going trans is absurd and out of character. To understand this, we need to look at her lore from previous Guilty Gear games. Admittedly, fighting games are really weird when it comes to story. Due to their origin as arcade-based experiences, developers rarely spend time in the game itself fleshing out their characters. Titles like BlazBlue and Persona 4 Arena are the exception. For most, the goal is to get players in and out of the cabinet without delay so that the machines make profit. That's why Fate Grand Order Arcade confuses the hell out of me. Are spectators really willing to wait in line as the player reads through Nasu tier cutscenes? How odd. Anyway, for fighters, this means that much of the character's stories are told through profiles that players can look up on the side. Hell, you could be a pro player and still not actually understand these characters without reading up on their lore. It's actually quite surprising that such an important scene for Bridget is told through arcade mode at all. This also means that a character's written profile is typically all there is to their story, making it easy to catch up even if you haven't played any of the prior games. Thankfully, the official bio given to Bridget on Arc System Works' website is not only in line with previous titles, but is also accurate to its Japanese equivalent. You'll have to trust me on that as I did do the research, but just like I said regarding Juniper, Japanese doesn't rely on pronouns we can easily latch onto. For older games in the series, Bridget's profile uses he/him pronouns, whereas this new one just keeps saying Bridget in lieu of any pronouns. Anyway, on to her actual story. Basically, Bridget was born as a biological male, along with her twin brother. Her rich family lived in a superstitious town that viewed twin males as a bad omen. This meant that families having twin sons would have to exile or sacrifice one of them. Not wanting to do either, Bridget's parents decided to raise her as a daughter, giving her a high-class education as a fine lady. That explains her feminine looks and mannerisms. At a certain point, Bridget realized she wasn't actually a woman, not biologically anyway, but kept playing along happily for her parents' sake. Instead, however, this actually brought guilt to her parents, who felt bad for forcing this lifestyle upon her. In an attempt to put an end to the charade, she took up the manliest job she could as a bounty hunter. By becoming rich and successful through a manly trade, and letting the world know that she's a boy, she hoped to prove her town's superstitions wrong. As a result, whenever people would mistake Bridget for being a woman, she'd correct them, affirming that she's a boy. And for the longest time, that's all fans had to go on for her backstory. Until Strive, she never had any indication that she might actually be lying to herself, or declaring herself a man exclusively to prove her town wrong. Rather, she appeared totally comfortable in her own skin as a femboy, and a lot of fans appreciated that. Bridget's new spin is based on the fact that she's now already proven those superstitions wrong. She's made a lot of money for herself and her town between games, meaning she no longer has to emphasize being a boy. Her point has already been made. This has left her without a goal to work toward, so she takes to the battlefield hoping to find a purpose. In addition to the endings I already mentioned, Chapters 1 and 7 of her arcade mode serve to further this narrative. In Chapter 1, she affirms to Gold Lewis that she's a boy, and that her feminine clothes are a long story. In Chapter 7, however, Gold Lewis points out that she's been doubting herself, and advises her to think about how to proceed in life without regrets. Even for a fighting game, this plotline is paper thin, trying to result in something profound after just 3 short conversations. This type of character struggle would be better suited for the longer narratives of BlazBlue. And who knows, maybe we'll see an expansion to the story mode that elaborates further on Bridget's journey. Regardless, a lot of fans simply think that the way that Bridget is written in the game doesn't match what they know of her from the previous games, while others stand by the artist's right to do whatever they want with the character. Of course, Arc System Works does have a right to the characters going forward, but one thing they don't own is other people's fandom. In that regard, it's totally reasonable for a fan not to think this character is really the same one they remember first experiencing. We see this dilemma a lot in Star Wars. Not only did fans feel betrayed by George Lucas's changes in the special editions, but Disney has also forced fan-favorite characters down controversial new paths. Look no further than Luke Skywalker, the benevolent hero who thwarted the Sith Emperor Palpatine, in part by confiding in the morality of his father, Darth Vader. Luke put his life on the line trying to convince his father to abandon the dark side, and this worked out brilliantly at the end of Episode 6. If Star Wars had died out there, then Luke would have gone down with a happy ending without further strife. When Disney bought the franchise, however, they started pumping out more sequels, giving fans even greater enemies to contend with. In The Last Jedi, Luke was turned from a beloved hero into a disgruntled old man who had given up on the Force. Apparently, what made him such a mess was that, when trying to train Han and Leia's son, Ben Solo, Luke sensed darkness in the young boy, and for just a brief moment, he considered slaying Ben in his sleep. The very idea that Luke, the man who had faith in Darth frickin' Vader of all people, would suddenly consider killing a child over some dark side premonition is ridiculous. So ridiculous that Luke's actor Mark Hamill disagreed with this direction. Thus, while Disney has the rights to change these legacy characters they now own, that doesn't mean fans have to like those changes. Similarly, I can understand why Guilty Gear fans might see Bridget's new direction to be a betrayal of his previous depiction. Personally, while I do draw a connection to Bridget and Luke Skywalker, I don't actually think the two are of equal severity. Based on what I've seen from prior Guilty Gear titles, Bridget never had too much development to begin with. Her interactions with the other characters were short. That doesn't make them bad by any means. It's just that I find it easier to see Bridget's journey in Strive as a natural extension of her overall narrative. One thing that ties it together for me is that despite trying to present herself as a man, she continued to dress and act more feminine. This could be taken as a sign that, ultimately, Bridget never resented her upbringing and was only trying to prove herself as a man so that her hometown wouldn't be so judgmental of twin boys. Given that she's already accomplished that goal, it makes sense that she would then have to decide her identity for her own sake. Of course, the most reasonable critique about Bridget's transition is that feminine traits don't necessarily correlate to actually being a trans woman. Traps, or femboys, are a perfectly valid identity that's quite progressive in its own right. They stand at the peak of the idea that being masculine or feminine doesn't make someone any more or less of a man or woman. A boy in a skirt isn't a girl, nor is a woman in pants suddenly a guy. This deconstructs gender stereotypes, allowing people of both sexes to express themselves without limitation. Inversely, there are some trans people who feel their own gender nonconformity is a strong part of why they transition to the other gender. In truth, it depends on how each individual views themselves. What's true for one person isn't the same for another. Thus, asserting that a femboy is actually a trans egg in denial only serves to reinforce the gender stereotypes that femboys subvert. I've seen people discussing Bridget on Reset Era, the worst site on the internet, declaring that the original femboy design for her was more of a joke than a sincere development. Even if Bridget may have started out that way, and I think that's a cynical way to view things, he became important and serious to many fans. Even worse, it's not unreasonable to consider what Bridget's journey says about grooming. The assumption is that Bridget would never have come out as a woman if she weren't raised as a daughter from birth. Does this mean the grooming was successful? The left often wants to write grooming off as a slur, but as a centrist, I do find it worth considering. Things would be more grim if Bridget actually took issue with being raised as a girl. Thus, while she may have been forced down that path in life, she seemed to do so happily, at least based on the official profiles the games give us. Personally, I don't think we should be so concerned about the morality of this specific fictional character. I'm pretty sure we know the sensible conclusion would be to raise children without influencing them in either direction, to let their expression form without restraint. It's unfortunate Bridget didn't have a choice during childhood, but she does now, and she doesn't have to resent her past if she doesn't want to. In the end, we're back to the root of the issue. What exactly are the creators' intentions for Bridget? Was making her trans really something Arc System Works felt passionate about? Or was this a decision made exclusively to appeal to the trans community? If it's the latter, then it does seem like a pretty douchey thing to do, taking away an iconic femboy to score progressive points. Fans only have this suspicion due to the large number of femboys being converted already. We already know that some Westerners think Japan's tomboys and femboys are just mistakenly written trans characters. How can we be sure that Arc System Works isn't just buying into that logic? The only thing I can really say without more feedback from the creators is that, to an extent, the people complaining about a lack of femboy diversity are actually kinda similar to the people hating on femboys about a lack of trans representation. Maybe the odds are stacked more to one side right now, but we've still circled back around to what I mentioned at the start of this video with characters like Naoto and Astolfo. Even if you prefer Bridget as a femboy, I don't think her coming out as a girl has to be an attack on feminine men. I'd like to believe that she, as a character, would be supportive of a femboy who had a similar experience but chose to keep identifying as a man. At the very least, I don't think all the features you like about Bridget are suddenly gone and now that she's changed a bit. In the same way that Naoto doesn't exist to tell trans men that they should just shut up and accept being women, I don't think Bridget has to be a sign that all effeminate men are actually just trans women in denial. Isn't it possible to be happy for Bridget's development while also loving femboys? I certainly hope so. The only negative I see in all of this is the combativeness on both sides of the debate. For every person trying to deny Bridget coming out, we've got another who antagonizes the situation by denying femboys. I can imagine the excitement of having a new trans character in gaming, especially one as cool and cute as Bridget, but that celebration shouldn't involve a condescending attitude. Maybe Bridget's narrative in Strive resonates with your own life in transition. Maybe, after years of denial and mental gymnastics, you found solace in embracing a transgender identity. That's wonderful, but don't act like this was inevitable. Instead, think of it like Bridget's own personal choice, rather than a statement on androgynous men just denying transness. That's not how it works, after all. Again, femboys are valid, and it's not okay to pressure them into a certain identity that they aren't comfortable with. Just like Naoto, if Bridget remained, or continues in other plot routes to remain a femboy, I'd hope trans people could understand that that's not a denial of their own philosophy and choices. A femboy Bridget would support trans people the same way a trans Bridget would support femboys. In other words, be a better person. Be like Bridget, Naoto, and Astolfo in the way they kindly befriend everyone, despite their differences in philosophy. For once, I don't really think there's a right or wrong answer. I promise I'll defend femboys and tomboys as needed, but this specific case may not be as guilty as some make it out to be. That's up to you guys, though. Let me know how you feel about characters like Naoto, Astolfo, Juniper, and Bridget in the comments below. Thanks for watching!
If you enjoy this channel, help us grow by liking, commenting, sharing the video, subscribing to OtakuDaiKun, and
most of all, smashing that notification bell so you don't miss out on all of our anime discussion, lore, or Let's Play content.
You can support us directly through Patreon, Subscribestar, or our YouTube membership, all of which come with benefits like exclusive vids and early access.
As always,
celebrate your fandom!
I want to give a special shout out to all my $10 and up supporters. Video Gamer 75, Stephen Elak, Samuel Gersten, Otaku Mom, Jens Bauman, Mystic Samurai 1983, Freebrick, Cosmonaut, RNGer Shuffles 1498, Alexis Yukio Gomez Yamato, Johnny Tsunami, Link Pendrago, Brandon Baker, Caitlin P, Vladimir Rovna, Succubus Sakura, Normace, Jonathan Padua, and SF Giants fan Mike. Thank you all so much.